thanks to the organizers of this symposium for having me here. My presentation is going to be fairly simple. It's about the concept of sanitation and water management in the Indus civilization. You know that the Indus civilization, of course, belongs to the Bronze Age, 3rd millennium BC very roughly, and it had contemporary civilizations in ancient Egypt, in Mesopotamia, which actually had started earlier. If by civilization we consider, the urban phase, the development of cities as the most important marker. There are many markers, and the exact definition of what is a civilization is, of course, a matter of dispute. But let us just take the classical definition. So, if you visit ancient Egypt, you will be, of course, enormously struck by the pyramids and huge colossal temples, colossal statues. If you visit Mesopotamia, there will be enormous ziggurats, which are possibly the proto-pyramids. So there are all these, striking architectural features that actually never occurred here in the Indus civilization. So initially, the mostly Western archaeologists like John Marshall, later on Mortimer Wheeler, who excavated there, were slightly disappointed. They used to say that it's a monotonous civilization. You have miles and miles of brickwork and nothing much else to account for. It took decades to really understand what was unique about this civilization, which the others in fact did not have. So, every civilization has got its own distinction, its own features, its own cultural environment, and we have to understand that. And it so happens that in the case of the Indus civilization, one of the distinguishing features is the existence of large-scale sanitation and water management, apart from town planning. But let me first remind you of the geography of the civilization. This is a map showing you some of the important sites. We will have, I think this is, okay, we will have, Mohenjo-daro is here in Sindh, of course, Harappa in Punjab, Kalibangan is in Rajasthan. Many sites were discovered along this, the dry bed of this Gagar-Hakra river, which has been identified with, by most scholars as the Sarasvati. So therefore, Indus or Harappan or Indus-Sarasvati civilization, as we like. We will see Dholavira. We'll spend a bit of time in Dholavira in the Rann of Kutch. Lothal is here near Ahmedabad in Gujarat. Altogether, almost a million square kilometers, which is much larger than contemporary Egypt or Mesopotamia, much, much larger, 10 to 20 times larger, depending how you count. So this immediately poses a lot of questions as to how this large area was ruled and somehow held together. But I'm not going to touch upon this. The dates of the mature or urban phase, when the cities first appear roughly around 2600 BC and until they kind of disintegrate from 1900 BC onward. But in some regions the disintegration is slower, in others it is faster. So anyway, this is the backdrop, and this is also a quick list. If you look at, you can just look at this column of the mature Harappan phase, where you can see the distribution of the sites in the Sarasvati basin. In Uttar Pradesh also has a few, Western UP of course. Gujarat has quite a bit, and finally the Indus region and surrounding regions, including Balochistan. So it shows you that there was not a single heartland as initially was thought. Initially it was called Indus Valley Civilization, but this terminology is abandoned by most archaeologists, and they speak either of Indus or Harappan or Indus Sarasvati. You have in fact now a kind of consensus, this is borrowed from the late Gregory Purcell, that this civilization had several regional power centers, so perhaps kind of city-states that were, agreed or somehow coalesced into the overall civilization. So this is something which we still lack a lot of data about, and though some of the regional capitals, potential capitals, like of course Mohenjo-daro here, Harappa would be here. This would be Rakhighari, currently being excavated in Haryana. And in what is called Sorat, Harappa, there would be Lothal, and Dholavira would be part of the Sindh region. In fact, it is a fact that Dholavira was discovered by the late Jagatpati Joshi when he was exploring the migration routes between Sindh and Kutch. And Kutchi language happens to be very close to Sindhi, much closer to Sindhi than it is to Gujarati. So with this, and finally, let us recall that the Harappans were very keen to branch out. They were very keen to explore, for trading purposes mainly, they were very keen to explore the whole Persian Gulf region, which had its own distinct civilizations of Magan, today's Oman, Dilmun, Kuwait and the Emirates, Mesopotamia of course, Elam in between Mesopotamia and Iran. And Harappan remains, especially seals, jewelry, pots sometimes have been found all over this region, including some parts of Central Asia. Curiously, very little of those regions has been found back in the Harappan civilization. So we're not sure what they imported in exchange. Anyway, this is just to give you a quick context. This is a view of the Acropolis or upper city of Mohenjo-daro. So very highly geometrical town planning strikes the eye. Large structures, strangely most of which remain still mysterious to us. We don't really know the purposes of all these large structures, but we'll visit one or two. And a sense, of course, very rigorous sense of planning, which again was not to be seen in contemporary Egypt or Mesopotamia, except restricted to the royal areas, the area where the pharaoh lived, where the palaces were located. Otherwise, no. This is a major street in lower Mohenjo-daro, which is also planned, certainly planned, but then things get a little less neat because of the compactness of the habitations. It's estimated that at least 50,000 people would have lived in ancient Mohenjo-daro. This is the largest structure found in the entire Harappan world, 50 meters length by 40 meters width. And it's a colossal hall which was previously called a granary in Harappa, but its exact purpose is unknown. And very careful research has shown that it was not probably kept for storing any grain. So what was it? Was it a kind of an assembly, a community hall? Well, all hypotheses are open. This is a view of Kalibangan on the edge of this river Gaghar, which has been identified with the Sarasvati. Again, in there's a dichotomy between upper city and lower city, as in Mohenjo-daro. And again, evidence of planning, geometric alignment of the streets, etc. Now, since I am at Kalibangan, let me stop a minute to say that this is one of the rare examples where no water structure has come to light at all. And there are just one or two wells located in the upper town, and no reservoirs whatsoever. So we will see that there's a very different situation elsewhere. This seems to indicate that the Harappans living at Kalibangan were drawing their water directly from the river. This is the message that the architecture gives us. One of the widest streets in Kalibangan, very interestingly, you can see at the bottom that the width of the streets, this is perhaps unique to this site, it is not so neat in other sites, were standardized. There were multiples of a basic unit of 1.8 meter. So there's a desire, and this is something that is visible in many aspects of Harappan life, to standardize. So standardization of the script, standardization of the seals, standardization of the pottery styles, pottery sizes also, and sanitation. And I'm coming now to my main topic, where we have, now this is well known, I mean you would remember from your textbooks, at least history textbooks, that there is extensive sanitation. Yes, well, not at all sites. Some of the smaller sites do not have very well-developed sanitation. Sometimes it's limited to a few areas. But in places like Mohenjo-daro, definitely so. And what prompted the Harappans to develop sanitation when actually it is not a compulsory feature of city planning? The best proof of it is that many of our Indian cities have very poor sanitation levels even today. So it is not compulsory. So why should they do that? This is basically a cultural feature. There must have been some attachment to hygiene, to cleanliness, to also perhaps the sacredness of water. We cannot answer for sure because we don't read Harappan literature and or writing, but we can speculate that this was an important cultural feature. And it dates back, interestingly, to the early Harappan phase. This is Kalimangan before the city develops. It's a kind of a growing town, if you like. And there are already streets, there are bricks, though they have different proportions than they will get in the mature phase. And we can see here that a few drains, like this one, a few drains are actually integrated in this which would be roughly between 3000 and 2800 BC. So in fact, it is from those earlier stages that this concept of sanitation comes. When we get to the fully mature phase or urban phase, this is Mohenjo-daro, and here you can see that this is a lane in the lower city, which of course has been excavated. All this would have been covered by mud, basically. And you can see here that on the other side of this wall, there would have been bathing platforms. I'll come back to the bathing platforms a little later. And there were drains taking out the used waters from those bathing platforms, or bathrooms if you prefer, and joining in a common municipal drain. Why do I call it municipal? Well, because first of all, it's in a public place. It's on a lane. It's buried under the level of the lane, and there would have been spots for easy inspection, because obviously they soon realized that it's very nice to have drains. And please note that according to Michel, a German archaeologist who worked for years in Mohenjo-daro, he found that the slopes of the drains were consistently 1 to 2 centimeters per meter throughout the city. So this requires an amazing amount of global planning, because you have to ensure that all the platforms where the houses are located have the desired heights so that your drains are going to have the desired slope. If you come to my city of Coimbatore, and I'm sure it's the same with probably Kanpur, the drains have no slope. So you know what happens when it rains, everything overflows. And they have no slopes because they've been integrated after the city developed. And you can't change the level of the houses in later phases. So this is obviously a feature that was integrated right from the beginning. It requires an amazing amount of thinking ahead, planning, and execution. And then there were regular spots for inspection, because there would be, of course, solid material in the drains, and this would have to be cleaned. Therefore, there had to be a municipal force maintaining this whole system. If you look at one house in particular, this is a large house belonging to probably a trader, a wealthy trader in Mohenjo-daro. And here you can see the lanes around it. You can see that this is the platform, the bathing platform, where the inhabitants would have taken their bath. Now, these were wealthy enough to afford a private well. I'll come back to the well in a minute. And there were an estimated 700 wells in Mohenjo-daro, possibly even more than that, half of which were private, roughly, and half public in streets. So the wealthier people were those who, and why should you want to have a private well? That's another very interesting question. If you have a public well, and the average distance calculated for an average Mohenjo-daro resident to have access to a well was something like 35 meters. So why should you bother having a private well? Well, because obviously a lot of importance is given to purity, you want to make sure that there is no pollution of your well. I mean, this seems to be the most obvious interpretation. So again, there is a cultural background here. Anyway, the used waters are going to flow into this drain, which must have been covered, of course, within the house. Then they cross underneath the boundary wall of the house. And you can see a very nicely curved here drain section. Of course, all of which is made of baked bricks, fired bricks, because in a context of water, you cannot do with just mud bricks. And then this goes on. This is now under the lane. We are now in the public area, and you can see a sump which is of course a device for any solid matter to deposit. So this sump will certainly have some kind of a manhole cover, whether it is just wooden planks or whatever, we don't know, or some stone slabs sometimes, and it will be cleaned regularly by a municipal force. So this is the basic functioning of the system, but there are some unique features in addition, very curious, interesting features discovered here and there, like the existence here of a vertical terracotta pipe about 6 to 8 diameter inches in diameter, embedded vertically in a wall. And this is found in several Mohenjo-daro houses. So why should you have a pipe embedded vertically in a wall? Obviously because on the upper floor, and we know that these houses had at least one, possibly two upper floors, because obviously there's going to be a bathroom on the upper floor. So the picture we get now is that the owners of this house would have lived on the first floor, a little away from the hustle and bustle and dust of Mohenjo-daro, because the streets were not paved and bullock carts were passing all the time. Therefore, the environment must have been very dusty. So there was an incentive to live, above ground level. And the servants who probably lived on the ground floor would have carried the water upstairs, and then the drain took it back down. So this is the kind of sophistication that did not immediately strike the first archaeologists, but that is still a feat of engineering, a feat of planning, a feat of execution. This is Lothal, a much smaller site near Ahmedabad, on the close to the Gulf of Khambat, where a dozen bathing platforms have been found here, perfectly aligned with this drain taking the waters away. This could be a ritual purpose. I mean, this is the thinking of the excavator SRO. Excuse me?
You've been talking about bathing platforms. How about latrines?
I'm coming to that in a minute. And these 12 platforms are perfectly aligned. They're not belonging to a particular house structure. So the thinking here, these are all conjectures. We just have to try to propose the most plausible conjectures. That's all we can do, is that there must have been some ritual function, perhaps priests using them or something of the sort, because they're not located in houses. And these are some of the large drains taking water to the lower part of the city, and this is also to channel rainwater. Now, you wanted about the latrines. This is it. At Harappa, various kinds of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, various kinds of latrines have been found, where some were directly connected to drains that would then connect to common drains. And then, of course, there is speculation among archaeologists that Mohenjo-daro must have been a fairly smelly place. But I personally do not think that the Harappans would have, tolerated this kind of. They must have found ways to mitigate this problem. One way also was not to discharge into the drains, but to use this kind of commodes, this kind of soak pits, which you can see here, where even this little goblet, obviously used for washing, was found during excavation. So there are various systems, and in this system here you can see, in fact, that these are the two foundations of very small, not pillars, they are seats. You have a seat on which you can comfortably sit down. So these are some of the systems. Now, not all houses had latrines. This is more restricted to the larger houses. But in Mohenjo-daro, even small houses had bathing platforms. And so bathing was accessible to almost the entire population, at least in Mohenjo-daro. If we move now to Dholavira in, as I said, in the Rann of Kutch in Gujarat, we have now the construction is very different here, because Dholavira had access to plenty of stone material, which Mohenjo-daro did not. Mohenjo-daro is right in the middle of Sindh. There's no stone at all. So you will find all the house foundations still there, built with massive stones. And you have a lot of drains, but the whole drainage system has not been worked out, because there's been quite a lot of removal of stones, degradation of the city. So the whole system is not clearly known. But here, for example, you have a drain ending in a soakage jar or a soak jar, which will be buried probably underground. Evidence of both stone-built drains like this one, but more often terracotta drains, horizontal ones. Terracotta, you know, that is baked clay, again 6 to 8 inches diameter, was found also plentifully. So there must have been fairly widespread sanitation here. Now, apart from sanitation, there are other aspects to water management, and I'll touch upon this briefly. This is, of course, the famous Great Bath in Mohenjo-daro, which initially was thought to be a kind of collective bath. This was what John Marshall had proposed, until it was realized that since all houses virtually had a bathroom, what was the point in having a collective bath in addition? So the current thinking is that it was probably a kind of a pushkarini, a kind of a, temple tank, or forget about temple, a ritual tank, a tank for ritual bathing. The only alternative proposal I heard was that it could be a pleasure bath for the king. But since we know absolutely nothing about a king, this seems to, there must have been some ritual connotation, especially with the existence of 12 side rooms behind those pillar bases, which could have been used by priests for ritual bathing before they would come to the bath. This is a possibility. So if that is the case, this would be the ancestor, the prototype of the later Indian tradition of having tanks, reservoirs attached to temples. The second very important structure found in Mohenjo-daro is the well. And this circular well is actually a marvel of engineering, because it is made not of rectangular bricks like all the other houses, but made of trapezoid, wedge-shaped bricks. And the beauty of it is that, you see, we are very close to the Indus. There would have been massive underground infiltration, seepage of water, and therefore pressure on the walls of the wells. And this prevented the well from collapsing inward. It would lock together. It is basically the principle of the arch in a vertical plane, but taken horizontally. And this is something to be marveled at, because obviously they must have experimented for a long time with wells that collapsed, but they were able to find a solution. The Roman hydraulic engineers, 2,000 years later, were outstanding. They developed many wonderful water structures, like from aqueducts to huge reservoirs and so on, but they could never solve that one problem of inward collapsing wells, and they had square wells made usually of stone, and which with the pressure of the surrounding soil and infiltrations would keep collapsing. Now, how did the Harappans build and maintain these wells are two big questions. I can only briefly mention that we have archaeological evidence that the wells were maintained actually for the whole life of the city, at least 600-700 years. To build such a well, obviously you have to build it from bottom up. So you first have to excavate the whole thing and then build the well. Now, it looks very simple, but in practice it's not simple, because you have those infiltrations of water happening all the time. So of course you would be selecting the lean season in terms of, when, obviously not when the Indus is going into spate, but nevertheless it requires a great skill, and there must have been, a lot of mishaps on the way. So, and finally maintenance, because these wells will silt. The water flowing in will carry a lot of silt. So removal of the silt has to be done at regular interval, and that means also sending people inside the well. So these are the kind of achievements that they are noted for. For just the sake of comparison, I'm taking 1 minute on this much later period. This is now in the Gangetic region, where the trapezoid brick well still exists in a few cases. I found 3 or 4 cases, but basically people now prefer this ring well made of terracotta rings. There's one very big engineering advantage to it, which is that you can build it from top downward. You first excavate a little bit, start putting a few rings, and then you just dig underneath, and the whole column is going to slide down. So this is, of course, a more advanced and very well adapted series of ring wells. This one is from Ropar near Chandigarh, and it traveled all the way to South India, where you can see at Mahabalipuram another example. Sometimes, like in Kalibangan, they must have been obliged to excavate a lot to build their wells securely. We don't exactly know, we're just guessing. But here, they obviously chose to make a huge excavation, build the well, and buttress it at the same time as they were progressing. So here you can see the buttressing supporting walls. This is a top view of the Great Bath complex, which I was showing you earlier. And you can see, in fact, here that there is such a well on the edge. The northern side now is here. I should have reversed the photo, doesn't matter. North is towards the bottom. And this is the one well which was supplying water to the basin. So how was it emptied? Well, it was emptied through this drain, which takes off from this corner here and goes all the way here. And there must have been some way to plug the opening of this drain at the bottom of the basin, here in this corner of the basin. This is the view of the whole complex. And this is the outlet of the drain, which is about 6 feet high. And interestingly, those drains were always made in what is known architecturally, they are corbelled drain. They are not true arches. The Harappans very strangely did not know the vertical true arch, though they were using the equivalent, horizontal equivalent. But this is a corbelled type, which can, of course, not as strong structurally as this is a closer view of it. Not as strong as the true arch, but strong enough to have survived for all these centuries. Now, finally, we come to Dholavira, where we have this huge city an island in the Rann of Kutch, where today there are no cities, in fact. You have only hamlets and small villages. And bracketed between two streams, seasonal streams. I will show you in a moment why they deliberately chose this location. Then this is the lower town in yellow, the middle town where most inhabitants lived, and in blue the upper town where probably very likely the rulers and the high officials, perhaps high priests, whatever, had their residences. So the challenge here is that you're going to design a city in an extremely arid place. Possibly the climate was less arid than today according to later studies, but nevertheless it would not have been a very, lush environment. And therefore the question is, how do you ensure that the city has water supply throughout the year in the absence of good monsoons? And we do know that the city is occupied permanently for at least 800 years if we include all the phases. So how do you ensure? This is an engineering issue, basically. So this is a view on the Google map where you can see again the upper city here, middle town, and the middle town is here, and the overall city. Now, why these buns here? Why these limits? I will explain in a moment. These are other views of the, just to give you the a feel of the impressiveness of the massiveness of the construction made of stone. This is the so-called castle where the rulers must have lived, one of the gates into the castle. And these are two broad streets in the middle town. So all of it, again, geometrically aligned and as elsewhere. Now, the water management, the basic of it was that there was these two nullas and relics of dams like this, you see, which you can see here, had been constructed dams made of stone have been found on both, which the intention was quite clear. It was to divert the dam waters into the city. So the city, in fact, was seen as a gigantic water harvesting device. It was not, the water harvesting was not taking place out of it. And then the result would have been, of course, this is one possible design of reinforcement of the stone dams, but it is conjectural. I'm not even sure that they would have needed to reinforce if the dams were well built with stones, but anyway. But this is what computer reconstruction gives us as the result, possible result, likely result, where we now understand better the role of these buns to cut this whole section of the lower town into segments, squares in fact, that will be as many reservoirs. So this is the water harvested from this stream and this stream, both of them. But in addition, there are going to be many other devices, this is another possible view, likely view, all conjectural again, but if there was not such huge water harvesting, and this is possibly 1/4 of the total area of the city, then there is no way the city could have been sustainable through the year. Especially when you will be encountering drought years or succession of drought years. You have to make sure that you have plentiful water supply. So there are lots of tanks dotting the city, even in the upper areas like this castle here. But you can see that they have steps leading you to the water level as it recedes. But in addition, you have underground drains connecting all of them together. And this is actually a stone well nearby I'll show you the plan in a minute, a stone well nearby. Here the stones are fairly irregular, which means they are not really troubled by the problem that the Mohenjo-daro inhabitants had. Obviously the underground infiltrations are not very strong, they do not threaten the structure of the well. Interesting structures like this curved and highly polished grey stone here, this is Dr. R.S. Bish, the excavator, standing on it. On the top of the ramparts of the castle, the ramparts were up to 19 meters in thickness, just the thickness of them. And they obviously didn't want to waste any rainfall, and they harvested even the rainfall falling on top of the ramparts, and this is connected to an underground drain that is going to fill some of the tanks in the castle. This is actually a plan of this well I was showing you, the stone well here, with these two drains. What it means very simply is obvious. It means that if these two tanks, which are fed by other drains, if these two tanks are going to be full, instead of overflowing and wasting the water, you send it back to the well and you recharge the well. So you see how the whole system is very intelligently planned. And probably water extraction was done through a pair of bullocks. There is a space here where the bullocks would have run, and you would have, you know, a pouch of leather or some pots possibly, but more likely pouch of leather, drawing water and the bullocks pulling it and then emptying it in a small other tank which is located here. Of course, very basic. But you can see that the size of these underground storm water drain, look at the right here, this lady gives us the scale, are enormous. And yet the region has very limited rainfall. So this means that they were not concerned, you know, as we might be when we study in a textbook, they're not concerned with the average rainfall through the year, which is low. They are concerned with the peak rainfall. That's what they want to capture. And that's what the architecture tells us. Excuse me?
Maybe the rainfall then used to be very good.
Not very good, but according to the recent climatic studies we have, it was a little better than the whole of Gujarat has a slightly more congenial environment than it has today. But not very good nevertheless. No, otherwise they would not have, if it had been very good, then we wouldn't see all these huge water structures. And there is more. So this is an example of one drain running north of the castle, and you can see here a manhole with stone slabs covering the drain. This is again for cleaning and inspection, and the drain continues, and it empties into one of those bounded reservoirs outside. Then there are finally some huge reservoirs. This one is on the eastern side of the castle. You can see the castle ramparts here, and it measures about 73 meters in length and 29 meters in width, so quite enormous. And in addition, it had, though this may belong to a later period, it's not very clear, it had here a stepped well at the bottom of it. So that even if the reservoir was ever empty, you could still go down and draw water from the well. Now, there could be some other interesting features, like you see those two vertical lines here, which come from this wall. According to I mean, there is a speculation, this is from Professor R.N. Iyengar, a seismology expert. When we visited the site together with Dr. Bisht, he said that these are typical fuses, as civil engineering call them, in the sense that if you have an earthquake and your wall is going to be shaken, this portion can fall off and it may prevent the other portions from falling off. In the sense that if you have a completely interlocked wall throughout, then the wall may fall off at any point. So, and in fact, we found that these vertical, they are just the joints where the stones stop overlapping. They are neatly coming at this point, are repeated up here at the castle. There are several of them. So is it that they really understood the nature of earthquakes after, of course, going through several collapses and then designed this kind of fuse, as civil engineering call them? Well, we can speculate, but if so, this would be, of course, very advanced thinking. And this one is completely cut in the sheer rock on the southern part of the castle. You can see it is 33 meters in length, and it has a secondary reservoir within it. So this, of course, as Bhuvan was explaining, also gives us a message of plentiful manpower, economic control of the manpower. This would have been, even in Harappan times, a semi-deserted area. And they wanted to set up Dholavira as a gateway into Gujarat to control all the raw materials extracted from Gujarat, including the semi-precious stones. So this means that there was great economic wealth and prosperity behind this. Again, underground drains connecting all these wells, all these drains, you can here see all of them on the southern side of the castle. And this is the rock cut reservoir I was showing you, but there are other wells upstream. And again, they are all interconnected, which means that if any of them happens to receive excess water, that will not be wasted, but will be passed on to others. This is a Google map view of the reservoirs as you can see them today, but it is speculated that there might be other reservoirs here also which are still buried. So in fact, at IIT Gandhinagar, we're going to start some GPR study to see whether we can identify some of the remaining reservoirs. Finally, this is Lothal, where there is a colossal reservoir of about 217 meters in length, the famous dockyard. There was a dispute initially whether it was a dockyard or just a reservoir, but the reservoir is too huge for this small settlement. It would make no sense. And enough features like vertical walls, absence of stairways, the presence of marine organisms point to a connection with the Gulf of Khambat, from where at high tide boats could have come and taken goods for export to other parts. So in conclusion, the Harappan, I'm using quotation marks because how far we can use it in modern terms is of course a matter of debate, but they had civil engineering, the corresponding civil engineers, hydrologists, architects at work through all this, and they appear to have worked in a very integrated manner. We find of course we should not imagine that Harappan cities were more developed than today's cities. That's not the point. There's no possible comparison because our cities are far more complex today. But what is certainly clear is that they were able to cope with the problems given to them by the environment in a very efficient manner and very highly planned, intelligent, and with a lot of innovations. So in that respect, perhaps they were slightly advanced compared to the present Indian cities. Thank you very much.
Sir, as you were mentioning about these drains in the city, you were mentioning about the drains in the city. So I had three questions in my mind which were related that since we are talking about drinking water in some sense, storing the water for future use, it would be used for cooking and drinking, then somewhere when we say that you are harvesting rainwater, then water could be muddy. That could be one issue. Then secondly, we are saying that we are storing them in big reservoirs, so standing water, with time it's not fit for consumption. That issue. Then thirdly, you said that it could be connected to Gulf also. Now, if you are connected to Gulf, then saline water, sea water is saline.
Right. Right.
So these three issues.
Good questions. Now the first is easy. They would use settling tanks to purify the mud. You just stop the water somewhere, it is going to settle. So, for example, in Dholavira, you can see that some of the tanks, are slightly upstream, and those are the ones where the silting would take place. And of course, they would have to desilt them regularly, which is another big question, but they were obviously able to do it. Now, about storing stagnant water, we are discussing, in fact, with Bhuvan at Kalinja. See, people have been drinking water from village ponds from time immemorial. How sick they would get through that is a matter of dispute. Yes, of course, sometimes you would have epidemics and so on, but I believe that there are chapters in books of Ayurveda, I'm trying to get them, about purifying water through herbs and things like that. So they may have had their own ways of purifying water. Of course, we have all seen villagers filtering water through very, very fine cloth, but that would not, of course, be enough to remove microorganisms. So, did their body get accustomed to the stagnant water? Did they have some techniques through kind of medicinal herbs? We don't know. But the fact is that Dholavira stocked its water during the monsoon and lived on it for the whole year. So they had to. And the third question, I'm sorry, I forget. Yeah, well, this is unique to Lothal. And yes, in that case, there would have been some saline water coming in, but this would be limited to the dockyard. Lothal has otherwise 2 or 3 wells, and it's a small settlement. So they would not, in that case, you're right, they would not have drawn water from the dockyard. They would have drawn it from the wells, yes.
Michel, I have seen, like in RSV subs, presentations and your presentations and conjunction view of Dholavira.
Yes.
So one thing is that see how long it goes back in the years, like 4,000 years or so.
This is, you can say, roughly 2,600 BC. So that's 4,600 ago. It's beginning. Well, there are 1 or 2 earlier phases, but doesn't matter.
So the point is, at that time the sea level was.
Yes, the sea level was higher. That is true. And I forgot to mention that we have now absolutely firm evidence that the run of Kutch was navigable, was actually branch of the sea, shallow branch, of course.
Yes, it was navigable.
It was navigable during Hanapan.
So the only point is that when these structures, which you are showing, they came in, because probably they might not have needed this at the time of the initial settlement. It's quite possible.
You see, the initial settlement, I will tell you briefly, is limited to the castle.
Yeah.
And then from this, it expands in 2-3 phases. So, I mean, Dr. Bilish has, of course, listed down the whole thing. But initially, yes, you are right. They would not have needed the whole of it. So this clearly is a kind of an afterthought coming when the entire city has been developed, fortified, and grows into a
And
fortification.
maybe that is one of the reasons that the sea level decided, that the sea level receded. And
I don't think the sea level had receded by then. No.
Because the climate will play a role here also.
It will. But you see, they probably did not have these salinization techniques. So the sea was indispensable for communication, and we have plenty of evidence that, for example, big stone material, heavy stone pillar sections, you would have seen them, were exported from Dholavira to Mohenjo-daro and further all the way to Harappa. Dholavira stone. So there is no question that they needed the sea as a communication, and this island, what we call today the Khadir Island, was really an island. Today you can walk through, you can walk through the run during the dry season. You couldn't have done that, right? So, but I think as far as water storage is concerned, it's not related to the presence of the sea nearby, because they needed still fresh water anyway.
What did they do with the wastewater?
Wastewater, it depends, different situations. In Lothal, in fact, the wastewater was dumped in the dockyard, which is in fact one more reason why we can argue that it would not have been used for drinkable water. In Mohenjo-daro, we don't know, because the drains are kind of going out of the city, but where they have been eroded away. So we cannot say for sure. Probably to fields or back to the Indus, which was supposed to have flowed very close by. We cannot say. This kind of question has to be seen on a settlement after settlement. There will not be one answer for all.
The reason I ask is since you are saying there was He put it into Ganga.
Well, the Mohenjo-daro people might have poured it into the Indus, but
Depends on the quantity of water we produce.
yes. But still, if you have 50,000 inhabitants and possibly more, that will produce a lot of sewage, no doubt about it. So, I guess the Indus might be a strong possibility. But the remains of the drains all the way, out of the city have not been found. Yes.
So I'm just wondering, once you have standing water, and if you are lining up the the bottom and the walls properly, then the water may not seep out. But at this scale, were they able to do it, or would the water seep into the rest of the city, below the foundation?
It would. You mean, for example, those large reservoirs were just bounded by mud, except for the fortification wall here, which is made of stone. Okay, stone and possibly bricks above. But these are just bounded by mud. So yes, there would be seepage, but see, they probably won't mind if they can recover it in some way, and that is why they have a few wells also. And maybe they are aware that if they recharge the water table, they can draw it later on. It's possible. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Of course, this stone, this rock cut reservoir here, that is waterproof naturally. The other one on the eastern, the largest reservoir on the eastern sector, the bottom has never been reached by the excavator. So, but it seems unlikely that there would be waterproofing. It would be
It has a damage to the buildings, the houses.
damage.
Damage to the buildings.
Why?
The houses. Once the water seeps below the
No, all foundations were of stone here, so I don't think they would have been. And anyway, they were on slightly higher ground. This is 13 meter higher than this point. You see the castle. So I don't think that would be an issue.
What kind of mortar do you use for this? Necessary.
In Dholavira, they use mainly, in fact, almost everywhere, the main mortar was mud mortar. You have a few cases of lime mortar here and there, but mud mortar was considered good enough.
Even in Bangalore bath?
No, in Mohenjo-daro, it's different. The bath I forgot to mention, the waterproofing was guaranteed with a kind of a gypsum plaster. There was lime mortar and gypsum. First of all, at the bottom, the bricks were standing on edge. Then they were very, very finely worked bricks with hardly any gap between them. Then there was a layer of gypsum plaster, which is something in between plaster of Paris and cement. And above that, they would put a layer of bitumen. Bitumen is naturally occurring tar, which they got from Balochistan. So you see, they thought it out quite well.
They
Yes?
use the trapezoidal bricks in
Yes.
the well, but why they didn't use it in the vertical cornice?
You have to ask them. I don't know. Sometimes you need centuries just for a simple thought like that to evolve. It's something like so it didn't occur to them.
So how they were managing water for agriculture?
Again, this will depend on the regions. There is no large-scale evidence of irrigation, artificial irrigation in the Harappan world. There have been some suggestions in Haryana that, for example, the natural channels, there are plenty of them, flowing down from the Shivaliks, were actually used for irrigation and sometimes diverted, sometimes kind of repaired and so on. So, but artificial canals, so far there has been no strong evidence of it. So definitely rain-fed crops, and we know that they were able to grow, plentiful quantities of barley, wheat, millets, all kinds of pulses and so on. But in terms of irrigation, there's very little evidence as yet.
Anything sort of like city gardens, etc.?
City gardens.
Like open spaces and then watering is required.
I don't remember right now. You have here this huge ground which is called ceremonial ground by the excavator. It's a kind of maidan. It's 280 meters long, but actually the floor of it was had a kind of plaster, pink colored plaster, and it must have been used for all kinds of public events. Gardens, we can't rule out, of course, some gardens in this middle town area, But then you will have to study closely. I think it's quite packed with habitations, so I don't know.
So with so much of reservoir,
Yes.
probably the gardens will not need any extra watering mountain. There'll be enough white below.
Possibly.
Okay, I have a question.
Actually, Dr. Desmond, he plans to be made this now. He leaves certain pockets, open pockets,
Yes.
there are no houses. That is where it is being planted and insurance.
Quite possibly.
In this plan also, we have left that area in the middle, in outside, this green area.
Yes.
That has been purposely left in that,
Mhm.
because in those areas also.
So was it a garden, or did they have trees like this to protect them from, you know, these areas are very prone to strong winds, which will carry a lot of dust. So we can imagine, we would have to, somebody would need to study this very closely. They might have kept some small belt of trees to protect from the dust, wind-borne dust. It's possible. I don't know. Sorry?
You have a slide there, somewhere
Yes.
towards the beginning. Can you please go back?
Yes.
Where there were a couple of people carrying bales on their heads.
People carrying?
There's a black and white picture.
Oh yes. Yes, here.
Yes.
Yeah, these are the workers employed by the excavation team.
So that seemed to be stepped and that's a big step.
No, not step. This is just the excavation happening at different levels. Huh? Those steps are just the result of a partial excavation, right? This would be the actual level of the street. You will have to prolong it. So don't take it as steps of that period. No.
No, I understand. I don't mean I don't mean that.
Okay.
But what I was wondering is there doesn't seem to be any place they could be coming from actually, because those are very.
No, there will be lots of intersections with lanes and streets. There will be, absolutely. When you look at the map, it's perfectly clear. Yes.
The rock cut reservoir, is that not a perfect rectangle in shape?
Which one?
The rock cut.
Dockyard.
Yeah.
Dockyard.
The reservoir.
Yes, one edge of it, the far edge compared to the photo, I don't know. I have not put the actual plan. I have only put an artist impression of the settlement. So I don't know whether this will give us. No, it won't give us. Oh, the rock cut. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear properly. The rock cut reservoir is actually rectangular. But where is it? It is here. This one. It is actually rectangular. I mean, barring a few centimeters here and there. But the secondary reservoir, for some reason, has been carved out at an angle with the first. Why? I mean, we have absolutely no idea.
When I read about Shakeway,
Mm.
the tanks are not perfect rectangle
Mhm.
because to allow the water to slow down, to spread out horizontally.
Yes.
Technically, it's called horizontal warping.
Huh.
So, is that the similar phenomena?
I don't think so, because Sringapur is directly related to the water flowing in from Ganga,
Okay.
which might have had some force. But here there is nothing
Already reservoir.
flowing in as far as we. Actually, in Dhoravira, to be honest, the full hydraulic system has never been worked out. It's only suggestions. We are hoping, if possible, in IIT Gandhinagar to try and do a complete modeling of the water system. Then perhaps we will understand better. We will, taking all the various levels into consideration. But again, the same problem as at Sringapur is here, that you're never very sure about the highest level, existing in those days, which would be crucial to the determination of the flow direction and so on. But still, we'll give it a try. But I don't think this would have been the issue here.
Michel, the rocks are basically, they are not lined up, like they are fresh as it is, like the natural, in the natural conditions.
In this type, very much.
Sandstone.
Yes, completely
Sandstone
rock cut.
itself will be a very good,
Yes.
because if they are fractured and all that, you will,
No, they're not fractured. They're not fractured. In some places, they have, as you can see here, or here better, on the left side, where actually the rock was not present, they built it up with stones. So you have a stone facing, but the whole rest is impeccable even today. I mean, there's a bit of erosion, of course, towards the top section. Yes, there is.
Well, I mean, this could be for aesthetic reasons. If you look at this perspective, if this was square or rectangular, it would come.
Possibly. So,
Anyhow, this, were there civilizations in Persia and West Afghanistan at the time? Was there some interaction?
there were plenty of interaction with not Persia, you have to call it Iran, because Persia is a much later development. Plenty of interaction between the Harappans, the Iranian plateau, the Afghan plateau, a site like Shautugai, I think. Shautugai is in Afghanistan on the other side of the Hindu Kush, and it has a lot of evidence of Harappan contacts. And recently around the Jiroft region of Iran, quite a lot of evidence of Harappan contact also has come up. So they were obviously communicating with Mesopotamia through the sea route as well as through the land route, cutting through Iran. I mean, this is what the evidence seems to indicate. Yeah.
Sir, since we know Indus Valley civilization is was on the banks of rivers, various rivers. Sir, I have just this query that on the lines of if you see Turkey and all those parts where there were aqueducts and those sort of water mechanisms available to bring in the water from elsewhere to the inside the city or town. So is there anything in the Indus Valley civilization?
No, there isn't. And it's not quite correct that all these cities are on the banks of rivers. They are not. You find cities, for example, Rakhigarhi in Haryana, Farmana in Haryana also, in fact, Dhoravira, of course, are not on the banks of rivers. They are a little away. As long as there is a small channel which allows communication, of course, Kalibangan is, Banawali in Haryana also is right on the bank of the Sarasvati. It's true. So, but you have both. So they were also interested in, conquering. I mean, the word conquering is probably wrong, but in expanding into the hinterland. So they didn't remain close to the rivers. But these kind of structures you mentioned have never been found so far. No.
So these were mainly on the river as well as groundwater.
Yes, absolutely. Oh yes.
Apologies to interrupt, but maybe we can come out for tea for a while and get back again because we're running slightly late.
Teaching at the school level, from at least 6th onwards, what you call the middle and we made it to secondary level, or do we teach history or science like this at all?
Science.
Not history of science, that's in your books on that, not history of science. Do we teach science more to
well,
like the way you presented that, because then you're actually sensitizing young minds to the sanitation, water, scientific
absolutely.
And getting rid of the prejudices of history like a progression of knowledge, the point you made about being able to handle their own diverse environment. So there are a lot of inherent cultural values about ourselves, our society, and our...
Very true.
Besides a very, very scientific and rational inquiry into history itself. So did you when you were presenting the particular Arthashastra in how then trying to look at the normative text and the canonical text on architecture and urban planning and looking at actually practice. That's very important because do schools of planning and architecture even look at that as a knowledge text?
No, the regular school teaching does not include anything much, except that I was pleasantly surprised to see that the recent NCERT textbooks on history which deal with the Harappan period are not too bad. They've made an effort to come up to date, though there are still a lot of things missing. But it remains very partial. So this perspective which you are so attached to and which is so important is totally missing from our school education.
One of the points that has been coming is that you're looking at Sandhi actually at the higher level, here at the IT level, because you already have a strong base for technical and technological investigation and inquiry. So you can apply that to the analysis of any object. But the point is that if you can think and make a recommendation, I don't think IT should do other those textbooks, but the point is that this comes out as a recommendation. Maybe you can get a large group to look at revisiting
True. We did make one effort for the CBSE. You might remember this course on knowledge, traditions and practices of India for classes 11 and 12, where we've tried to put a number of these features, but we will discuss.